Welcome to Best Practice, a show where we interview leaders in the building industry to unpack the tools, strategies, and tactics they use to run great organizations. Today, we're very excited to be joined by Jan and Inge of MVRDV for a fireside chat about how to win work. Jan joined MVRDV in 2008. Before this, he started his career as a journalist and then shaped the public image of OMA for nearly a decade. As partner of MVRDV, Jan leads the contracts, business development, and public relations efforts, forming a client-oriented, fast, and strategic studio that includes a strong visualization team. He leads MVRDV's branding efforts and has overseen the practice's rapid expansion into new markets, focusing on solutions for global issues through its architecture and urbanism. Inge is managing director of MVRDV and is an architect who specializes in change management, company professionalization, and organizational development. Inge worked for various international companies before she came to work for MVRDV in 2008, where she was responsible for project coordination and planning and helped set up the firm's office in Shanghai. Since 2018, Inge has been MVRDV's managing director and a driving member of the management team at MVRDV. And with that, thank you very much for joining us today, Jan and Inge, and thank you so much, Chris, as well.
Hi, great honor to be here. I have to correct you, maybe it's our mistake, but contract management, I have
handed over.
Oh.
Yes.
All right, well, that's a good clarification. Passing the baton. So, well, on that, the first question is perfect then. What is, how can you describe the working relationship between the two of you, MVRDV?
Yeah, you start.
All right. Well, we represent here the operation of the company and in a way the future. We are 2 of the 11 studios that we have. Maybe one is missing here at the table today, which is finances, but the other 8 are then design studios. So with these 3 support studios, we continuously work to deliver a few things for the architects, and that they have a smooth design process, and we try to have good working conditions for them, make sure that we're financially healthy and that there's a steady stream of incoming projects. So that's basically what we do. We help the company function, or the practice. Yeah.
How interesting that you described it as studios, like you contextualize the groups, these like functional units in sort of a similar sense to your design business units. Have you actually adopted some of the mentality of the studio kind of culture to these other functional organizations like operations, finance, or as you called it, the future?
All organized in a similar way. There's one person heading these studios. They are also part of the MT, the management team. And in all the studios, we have a similar approach in our HR systems, in how we collaborate, in our social events, in how we communicate. And we also deliberately try to really mix these 3, let's say, non-design studios with the 8 design studios to make sure that the contracting part is incorporated from an early stage, and that the financial people really understand what our designs are about, so that it becomes one coherent entity.
Yeah. Equality is super important for my staff, at least. They don't want to be more or less than the architects, but they want to be on the same level in terms of where they stand in the company.
I'm curious then how what are the common conversations that you're seeing yourselves having, at least between both of you, when it comes to, maybe just what are the most common conversations would be interesting to know.
I think I always want to talk about the future and where do we go, and Inge always wants to talk about how do we get there.
Yeah, I think that sums it up quite nicely. Yeah, and I think when I started, I've been organizing many things, and even to some extent people said, please stop organizing. But what I'm trying to do is to organize things in such a way that it doesn't feel that it's really a paved road. So because of all the systems, they should basically ease the processes. so that you don't need to think about how do we actually do this. No, it's common sense. We always take step 1 to 10 and then we reach the end. So we're trying to facilitate processes. And as Jan said before, to really smoothen the design, what our core part of the business is.
And it's of course a creative company, so people are not fond of new rules, regulations, protocols. They're all bad names. So whatever Inga comes with has to prove itself pretty fast.
It does.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Are those things that, like, one question we sometimes talk about is how certain ideas for improvement are surfaced and flagged? Like, do you find that in your conversations, is it that you're hearing from team members at different levels of the organization, frustrated with certain workflows, or either entering new markets presents new workflows themselves? Like, how are those things surfaced back up to the strategic team?
It could be frustration or that people don't understand how things work, but it could also be so that we see that in some of the design studios, the systems are so different. And then we think, okay, we need to align, because it shouldn't matter whether you work in studio A, B, or C, you're working at MVRDV. So if we see that the systems start deviating too much, then apparently there is a need to say, okay, how do we do this? And can we just briefly put it on paper so that we don't need to have this discussion again in a year's time and again in 2 years' time? No, we agree now as an MT, this is what we think works best for MVRDV. And that works because that kind of kills all the future discussions that you may have on this. So then you can spend that time talking about the future again.
And mistakes. Huh? I mean, we're a growing organization, and you do make mistakes, and then you need to learn from them and make sure that they don't happen again, which is also, I think, one of the drivers of organization.
And I think then there's the golden rule. So when we make one mistake once, then sometimes I would say, let's make a system. And then Jan would say, let's not make a system for everything. But if then it happens again and again, so I think that's kind of the rule. If you think, okay, but we've had this discussion before, then that triggers the thinking, okay, let's then semi-formalize this to make sure that we don't have any confusion again. It should happen more than once before it gets a guideline or a protocol or a system.
That's fantastic. How you basically showed us how you like work through challenges sort of theoretically. I'm curious, both internally and externally, what are some examples of actual key messages that you want MVRDV as an organization to be received by the team? And then also, what are those messages that you want the outside world to receive about MVRDV?
Maybe if I do the internal or you the external. For me, internal, it is very important that we are a pleasant yet highly ambitious organization, company, practice. People should want to work here. They should feel that they go home at the end of the day having had a satisfactory day with good interaction with their colleagues. For me, that is very important, that you see that you can contribute, that it brings you joy, that you feel that you are respected and rewarded for what you bring. And that you can also combine it with a personal life, that it's not only about work. So for me, those are important elements.
Yeah, there is this ambition to be the best employer in architecture. And I'm not sure whether we're there, probably not, but we are at least trying to get there. That's a continuous challenge and ambition.
And what would you say externally?
To the outside world, we have a really ambitious message, because we're like, you know, when architects come from the university, they have learned to do everything they believe. And we are like that still. We don't believe in specialization. So we want to be good in everything. We work from really small projects like a VAST, that's our smallest so far, until large scale urban planning and everything in between. And so in that sense, combining this with our radical solutions, the remarkability of our design, and then also our if you want, philosophical agenda, which is social, green, focused on innovative solutions to urgencies in the world and so on. We really want to be relevant as a practice and participate in this global change at the moment. And you can imagine that our PR team is continuously struggling with this stack, this heap of information I just gave you that needs to be out there. And all in all, at this moment, perhaps our biggest challenge is that we want to communicate also that we care about the planet, and this all, in my view, needs to be extremely based on facts, and because so many companies do it. So we as a practice need to have a communication about sustainability that is really traceable and very practical.
I'm curious, Jan, you had a book that came out recently about how to win work, which was a really amazing read, and I really suggest everyone listening to go out and get it, because I think it's one of the first books that I've seen that talked about this problem through all its stages, but also with case studies in a really, really clean way. And what I'm curious is actually, this question is actually going to be for Inger. It's more, if Jan has kind of written this book about how to win work, what would be the book that you would write, that you would want to write, or that you have some ideas of writing in the future, that could be a good pairing maybe to how to win work?
I would write a book on how to organize a creative business. It can't be a surprise, I think, after the introduction. How to focus on having a positive impact, but also with a very clear focus on how to maintain your creativity and not become a very corporate company or corporate designer. Because what we want to do is be a creative company. And of course, you also need to make money, you need to make profit, but this is really not our main objective. We just want to design great, creative and innovative solutions. So how do you do that? What is needed at the back end to make that possible? And what really helped me is that I'm trained as an architect, so I can understand that you need to organize certain things, but also to a certain extent. Don't kill the creativity by coming up with too many guidelines and systems and ticking boxes. So that would be what I would write it about. And when we grew so fast, Jan already mentioned the book earlier, our internal book. When we grew beyond 100 people, we also did a little tour through Europe. We spoke with many different companies, architects, but also very, other companies that were creative or had grown really fast, to ask them, how do you maintain your identity whilst being in this growth spurt? And
how to maintain creativity.
Definitely, yeah. And then we came to the conclusion that the compartmentalization that we now have, so organize ourselves in studios, that really works because it gives people a sense of belonging. It also gives people the sense that you're part of a smaller studio. That really helped us to define the path, and I would also bring that into my book. Yes.
I should call it How to Build Work.
The sequel, yeah.
How do you?
No link yet to Amazon, Chris.
How do you? That's fascinating. How you found that the compartmentalization of these studios, was it a certain size that was important, and is it a typology that is defining the different groups? How have you broken out the different design groups? Based on either project type or region, or is it size? I'm curious what parameters you use to kind of adjust when it's time to move to a new group.
It's a combination, really. It's mainly geographical, because that helps you with the language. We have a French studio, we have an Asian studio where we have a lot of Chinese speakers, for instance, a German studio, but we also have an urban studio that can cover the different markets that we work in. We also have an interior studio now, so it's a bit of, it's a mix of different areas. And they can also interact. So if you have an interior project in Asia, we make a team that is compiled out of both studios. And we said the design studio should ideally between 20 to 40, max 50 people, so that you still have that team feeling.
And so you basically have to apply for another job if you want to change studio, if you're in the higher parts, whereas the architects usually they're a bit more flexible, but in the management of the studio, project leaders and so on, they actually have to apply. They cannot just move like that. And it helps. Also, sometimes a studio can be an ambition. So, for example, we named one of the studios the Americas, and they started with projects only in the Netherlands and in Eastern Europe. And now finally we have American projects. So it was very important to give them the name that it was clear where they were moving at that moment.
Oh, that's fascinating. So there is also a relationship too between, let's say, what I'm kind of picturing, if this were a diagram, is that there's like certain studios that are almost matrixed, right? They kind of are feeding into cross other studios as a resource to collaborate on different projects. And then it seems like, are both your teams similar in the sense of like the operational team and the business development PR team? Is that also basically that studio runs across all different teams? And if so, is it the idea that you have embedded people within other studios to help, like for the Americas, let's say, is this business development sort of structured in the sense that you have a person in that team helping to like build pipeline for the Americas, or is it a bit different? Because for context, like sometimes we see it where like some firms operate with like it's kind of seller doer model, right? Where project teams themselves might have PMs or maybe principals as part of that studio that are trying to bring in work. And so it'd be interesting to hear how you look at that structure.
Yeah, so the BD and PR teams, they are collective teams, so that that it's a bigger group that can be flexible. If one studio is getting bigger and another studio is getting smaller, then maybe it's good to shift the attention a little bit. However, they do have one partner in each team, and PR and BD for each studio. So it's a hybrid model to what you described.
But it's also deliberately that PR and BD are separate teams, because then you can also build, how do we want to do BD as MVRDV? That you have standard fee proposed, that the way you present yourself to clients, that doesn't matter which studio it comes from, we just have our MVRDV approach, and the same for PR. So there is a deliberate choice in making those specific teams.
That's really nice jobs, because they work with all the studios, they see all the projects. So we also have lots of architects working there. So it's if you're an architect, you love architecture, this is exactly the place where you see most of it. You're not, let's say, stuck in one project for 5 years or something like that, but you see them all coming fast. It's really, really nice.
And that was also one of our recommendations of our tour to the different companies when we grew so fast, that as much as possible, the people in the non-design studios, let that be people that have either an affinity with architecture or were once architect, that you can really relate to what's going on in the company.
I mean, that part's like incredibly fascinating to me, because there, it's often it would be interesting to hear your perspective on this, but it's often that when you go into the industry, right, or when you go to school, you don't come out of it thinking like, I want to do business development. And so I'm curious if it's like something where, how do you build even that internal talent pipeline where people kind of self-select themselves either within the company, or even just the idea of going into business development as an architect might be foreign to some people, right? They might just like, it's not what they signed up for or thought about it initially. But how have you found it to be successful where you're able to find people that are interested in making that move?
I think it started very small, that we found a CV of a young architect who had also worked for a magazine. And we offered her the PR job and she took it. She's still with us for, I think that's 12 years ago or so. And we do that with all kinds of people. Sometimes you see somebody who had a year of economic study before they moved into architecture. So you could also do that. But these are also the people that actually go for architecture. Or it's like me, you know, I love architecture. I'm not an architect, so for me it was very natural to go to an architecture practice and do something else. And yeah.
But we also have people that come from the design studios that are now in your BD team.
Yeah, because they also
love networking. They
Yeah.
have a great network. They are fantastic in going out there and selling MVRDV. So that's, yeah, it can
some
come
people
from
that-
all
that are-
directions.
Yeah, indeed. There's like people that are totally impatient because in BD you have continuous deadlines, and in the architecture you have them as well. But you know, it's like 3 months for a competition. It can last 5 years before the building is there. So let's say for very impatient architects, BD is a pretty good place. Yeah.
I have to ask, I'm going to add to this too. Really curious what the 3 most common questions you get, Jan, after having read your book. And I got to add too for Ingar, what would you think would be the 3 most common questions someone would get after reading the sequel, How to Build Work?
Well, I can't really give you 3 most asked questions because it's usually where I have 2. One of them would be, how would you found an architecture office in Bulgaria? So I have to say I have absolutely no idea. The other one is, oh my God, this is way too much, your book. How do I set a priority? How do I do all these things? So that's a very serious question, of course. And I think I also actually answer this in the book by saying you need to lay the focus on the things that come more natural to you. And then you asked for 3 things. So the third would be that many of the readers invited them to contact me on LinkedIn, and they sent me their stories. So I have lots of small case studies of all kinds of ways how people can actually do PR and marketing and architecture. And that's really, really, I'm so grateful for that, because this feedback makes it also really worth writing a book.
My first question, of course, is when is your book coming out? Because it's not yet there. I'm so excited. Sometimes I tell this story on how to organize a company in my lectures, and then often the question is, what do I need to study to become this or to get a position like you have? I guess that will be a question then as well. And to that, my answer normally is try to be like a sponge, go out there and listen and absorb and follow courses, read books, and just listen carefully and ask a lot. And I can imagine that there will be a question on where is the balance on when do you stop organizing and when is it still contributing to having a better or more streamlined or more efficient or more creative company.
No, those are all great questions. I am curious now to kind of transition a little bit into some of the changes you've seen since joining MVRDV. I'm curious aside from, let's say, entering new markets, which has its own changes, right? Because it's a whole different mentality. Everything is very, very different often. Are there any changes that you've been able to track over the past, over 10 years at this point, that specifically with clients, like, has anything changed in terms of either from a business development perspective or a PR perspective of how has the mindset with clients changed? Have their attitudes changed and preoccupations changed? I mean, I think obviously maybe sustainability might be one factor. Climate change is one kind of pressure or something that clients might be actively thinking about. But is there anything even about the approach to business development that has evolved and changed over the course of, since you've been at MVRDV?
I would say the entire discipline has changed, because when I started to work for architects, which was in '99, it was in many countries still a protected profession, and there was no such thing as business development. And in many countries, you had this fee system, so it was very clear what the architect would earn. There were standardized contracts and everything. So quite a bit of what BD and PR is doing in our practice was not necessary, because it wasn't this kind of business where you would need that. So that has changed dramatically, and it has become a real business with also financial competition. And so we have very grown up negotiation processes with clients. And what's also changed perhaps from the time that I joined MVRDV is that we grew from 45 people to way above 300. So that means that also you have much more professional people on the other side of the table, where our projects used to be perhaps much smaller, maybe sometimes more artistic. Now we also work for really serious real estate developers, and they also expect a very professional architect to meet them and make contracts. And yeah, this entire side of the practice, which is not design, they also expect to be professional. So there's a continuous development still, as you grow, not just in size but also as a company, to change these things.
Yeah, I think you mature if you the company becomes more mature also in these processes and how you deal with them. And I also think in the beginning, BD, PR, I think many people confused the two abbreviations, what's what, and I don't know what the difference is. I think that has become much clearer, and also what the effect of one is on the other, because great PR brings BD that we can react to. And if you don't have PR, you need to proactively go out to do your BD. So I think that whole cycle of how things work, and also how you can let your successful projects lead to new work, that is something that, yeah, I think you have contributed enormously to for MVRDV in the past decades.
One thing that we sometimes see paired up, so if we think about like PR and BD being sort of in the same studio as Jan's, Ingar, we will sometimes see finance and operations being that pairing on the internal side of the back office. And what's kind of interesting is in your case, there are two different studios, but do you have a way of thinking about the operations side where it's kind of two pieces in the way that PR and BD are two pieces, or do you see that as finance plus operations?
I see that as a cycle that you need to close, because you have BD, then you have your contracts, then of course you have finance and operations during your process, and then what the final result is needs to feed back into your new BD, and of course you also have PR at the end. And I think in the beginning, but yeah, also at the end of the project, of course. But this is something that we have also learned a lot on as a company. We have now software that enables everybody to see the actual results of projects. So you can use that as a base for your new fee proposal instead of that old fee proposal that you sent. So I don't see this as a linear process. Of course, per project it is linear, but as a company, it should definitely be a circle that you close. And by bringing those teams closer together, by making sure that there is a close link between BD and contract management, between finance and contract management, and finance and business development, you make sure that everybody is kind of on the same page of what's happening and what the changes are or what's coming up.
This iterative cycle that you mentioned is, and you mentioned it earlier too, about learning from failure, and how there's like these, we talk about them sometimes as cadences, in how feedback is both surfaced, but then re-implemented as new procedures and things like that. Like, does your team have a cadence that you stick to? As an example, we've interviewed some firms that talk about, you know, there's what they meet about on a weekly basis. There's what they meet about on a monthly, quarterly, and yearly basis. Like, can you walk us through a little bit of what that might look like in terms of what kind of questions are being asked when?
Well, every month I have a talk with every studio director to look at their studio results and how that links with the annual budget, what the plans are. Then there are separate meetings between the studio and business development. So if they are low on work, they will have a different conversation with business development than in other periods. Contract management comes in when needed, because that's really when a project starts. So then they are, what I see more and more is that they're in from the very early stages, so that helps. We have annual business plans per studio, but also as a company, we have a midterm review twice a year, which should, then midterm doesn't really make sense, but we do that before the summer and also, let's say, September, October. And then that also feeds into the business plan for the year that's coming up. And we have weekly MT meetings, and there we really look together at the pipeline. What's coming in, who needs work, what kind of new work will we accept or will we follow up on, and where do we think it doesn't really meet our expectations or our ambition. So we have different levels of meetings, and yeah, when something is urgent, then of course we will have an in-between meeting to solve issues.
And you're talking also about targets for the team. It's there's the annual budget. That's the main financial target. But for the business development and PR team, the main targets that they work from day to day are actually more typologies. We set out what typology is our priority at the moment, and where do we want to have a good portfolio in. And these are the challenges. And also here it's changing. Imagine mixed use is fine, then maybe public buildings needs more attention and so on. So this is much more content based than solely financial.
Finance, yeah.
One question that comes up a lot, especially in smaller firms, but I think generally is applicable, is around pricing and trying to make a different case for value that you're delivering as an architect. And I imagine that you have figured out some interesting things about how to make this case, how to track results, not only internally, but also externally for the clients that you you work with. So I'm curious if you have any tips for principals, firm leaders in the audience who are challenged with creating new budgets with their new clients after having seen that it's very difficult for them to make their existing practice as profitable as will keep them going in future years.
Oh, well, what we look at, it's easier for us to say this with a long track record, and we are at a negotiation table in a different position than a starting architect. So what I say may not be applicable to all, but what for us is very important is that the client that you talk to has the same or a similar ambition as you do as an architect. Because what we see is that that will smoothen the whole fee conversation. Because if this client has an ambition and he or she feels that you are the right party to fulfill this ambition, you will find a way to agree on fees. So that's one thing. I really think you need to connect on content and probably also on a personal level. The other thing is that we, and I hope that goes for all the architects, that you add quality, that you don't just build volume, you don't just build structure, but by bringing in an architect, you make sure that you build quality, you build something that the end users appreciate and hence will take care of. And I think that is also an important thing, because then if the users are feeling responsible for the structure or for their house or for the neighborhood, they will use it differently than when it's an ugly building. I think that's also scientifically proven. And another thing that we always do, and that's very much ingrained in how we work, is that we try to reach a little bit further than the actual question that the client has. That can be on quality, that can be on a completely different solution than that the client was actually asking for. And it can also be that we find ways to actually maximize the quantity that a client can build on that specific plot. So then you also add quality, because more square meters means more rent or more profit or whatever the use of the building is. So that is, yeah, I think those things I would bring to the table when talking to clients.
Yeah, we definitely try to exceed expectations. Doesn't always function with every project that we do, but quite often, and we go back to the buildings after some time. We talk to people that live there, work there, use them. We talk to the clients, and usually they are super happy. So we are, in that sense, a success. Recently, we also looked into it with a cost consultant that made a statistic about the value of the real estate of our buildings and around our buildings. So there was a very good outcome. We're also gonna talk about this quite soon publicly to show that this is actually also a way to statistically evaluate good architecture, and that's something that we always want to say. You pay a bit extra, but you also get a lot extra. So it's
in the long run, it's cheaper. I think that is definitely the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's phenomenal. And my mind is reeling because there's just so many different ways to take this, but I wonder how much does the brand of MVRDV help? In other words, like when it comes to, and this is a conversation we have too, no matter what size of firm, right? There's something different about someone coming to you as a prospective client who's already kind of bought in to you as a company, but also like the ethos of the company, right? That there's now, they feel like they understand MVRDV's philosophy and perspective. And so the conversation around fees is just very different because they're kind of bought in, right? They already align with you, and which would be very different from them going to someone else in which they don't feel that same level of alignment. Do you find that is the case? And if so, do you ever, maybe on the flip side, just not work with clients potentially who don't align with the company in some way, right? Where it's like part of a no-go, like a no-go decision-making framework that you have?
We do have clients sometimes where you enter the conversation and you think, well, you just want a box, you just want to make money. And then we are not the right architect for you, not for us, but also in the end, not for that client. So then it's better to be honest from the beginning than when we come with outrageous suggestions where this client thinks, but I just wanted the box. I mean, you can sense this from the beginning, whether, that's the ambition, what I referred to in the beginning. You need to understand, you need to manage expectations and understand whether you want the same.
Yeah, and that's not always very easy because some clients, they come, we have a certain name, so they would like to have a box with MVRDVs on it. So in order to make more money, that's also not what we like to do. We are very authentic in what we believe in, and we always have been. Also in times that we didn't have a big name, and maybe the rock group Kiss, when with the lots of makeup, and when they were still touring just bars and pubs, they would still do all the makeup even if there were only 2 people. And in the beginning, when I joined MVRDV, quite often people didn't know us. They thought this is weird stuff that they're building, and it was not necessarily, our brand value, our philosophy wasn't always seen as a positive thing, but more as a risk. So you need a few buildings to actually prove to the world that you can do it. And we had that moment with the market hall in Rotterdam, that people finally saw that it can be done. Before that, we were up to a certain point a paper architect, and suddenly there was evidence that it can be done. And this was really the pivotal moment where we became a more moved from this paper architecture to brick and mortar.
And maybe it's good to add also for the balance in what kind of company we are, because now we talk about fees and how we meet each other there. We also find it important to sometimes work for a very low fee with a client that has a high social, sustainable, or whatever positive ambition, that we think we're willing to be part of this. And then we try to break even, but even if that's not possible, we would sometimes say, yeah, sure, we do this. So I think it's also important that we don't only go for the big architectural impact, but also where can we have another kind of impact with a social element, or making a design for a completely different element.
We're now working on the new Vogelrij, which is the oldest social housing project in the world. They have turned 500 years. Somewhere in Germany, and they wanted from us a project to design the Vogelrij system of the future, that it could be exported globally to all kinds of people who would like to open one of these social housing projects. So also here, that was one of these projects where we really didn't earn any money, but we felt this would make such a big difference that we really needed to do it and needed to be part of it. And also it's just so much fun to do that. So it's rewarding and makes us happy.
And sometimes this also comes from our own team members. In the area where the office is, we had a project to make this area much more green and get cars out of the streets and turn that into temporary small parks. So that was, this then comes from our team members, and then we don't talk about, okay, what's the fee? How do we do this? No, we want to do this. We want to make an impact and show what a different world could look like. So I think that's also the balance that people really appreciate when they work here, that there's space for that.
And it's great R&D, because these smaller projects, they actually feed then all kinds of knowledge into the larger projects that we are well paid for.
Yeah, and you have a section in the book about planning workflows, and considering it's kind of an operational question as well, I'm curious what your thinking is about overbooking because of the risk that a project that you even contract on will get delayed. And I'm curious if you could try to contextualize this too in terms of how a small to mid-sized firm might approach this as well, because I think that some might think that, this is only possible through the affordances of a very large firm, like a 400-person firm. But considering that you've seen, you've started off in a 40-person firm at MVRDV, I'm curious how you might relate this mentality and this approach to the small firm as well.
We overplan. We still do that because what you see is that architecture in itself is a very volatile business. I think all architects will acknowledge this. Projects can all of a sudden be put on hold. And I think especially now, at least in Europe, you see that there's more uncertainty on the market. So things get delayed or maybe even stopped completely. You don't want a team that is then twisting their thumbs and waiting for the next project to come in. So we always have the tendency to indeed have more in the pipeline than you can maybe accommodate in your teams. And if it then all happens at the same time, we have a flexible pool of people. So if push comes to shove, you could say, okay, we call these freelancers and they help out on this project, or you temporarily put other projects on hold, which is of course a luxury that we have as a bigger company. And when you're smaller, that becomes a little bit harder. You could possibly compare it to KLM flights or any other flight. They always overbook because passengers don't show up, and then you don't have 80% occupancy, but it's still full and people are okay to take the next flight. So it's, I would say it's smart, but depending on your size, you overbook with maybe 5% or with 10%, depends on the type of project you have also.
I wrote this in my book also after a discussion with with an architecture firm with only 4 people, and it's a couple. She wanted to overbook, and he didn't want to do it because he couldn't handle the pressure and wouldn't sleep at night. So he won, but the one project that they had, they had 2 projects. One of the 2 actually stopped, and instantly they were in existential trouble. So even for a smaller firm, this is much more important to have a good flow of projects. So they survived this, but also learned that a little bit of overbooking is super essential for them, right? Because it just basically is just in reality, it will lead to a stable flow of projects and not to too much problems if you do it in a good way.
Yeah, and I think it also helps if you have more smaller projects, that you make one team that takes all those projects together as one bigger project, because then you can sort of balance out the peak in one project with a lower pressure in the other. So then you say this group of 5 people take these 3 smaller projects, and then that kind of keeps itself intact.
I mean, that this has been such an amazing conversation. We do have some questions from the audience that maybe we can pick up. So as Inga said, this is from Luciano. Thank you so much. How do you maintain your creativity without turning a firm into a corporate one, in a sense? Like there's a thin line. I'm going to sort of try to paraphrase here. I guess like between having sort of a lab mentality versus running a smooth organization. Then the question could be, how has MVRDV's evolution in regards to relevant topics over the years? Has it? Yeah, I guess the question. Sorry, I should have probably pre-read before I read this. It's a little bit tougher. But I think that the gist of it is essentially like, has the preoccupations of the firm changed over time, and if so, or are there any consistencies in those preoccupations, like the things that have been core to MVRDV? And maybe this is part of this idea of like how it started, where it's 3 partners who have a very diverse sets of interests at different scales of a city. Is there any kind of through line that continues, or what has kind of changed as well?
I think roughly we were very much about densification, having grown up with the warning by the Club of Rome, and that is still in our DNA every day. What has changed massively is that we also now understand that the warning of the Club of Rome is really comes into reality, and that just focusing on densification is not enough, but we also need to actually learn all these sustainable technologies to make our work not contribute to the climate change, but actually be some kind of a tool against it. So, and that's a really big challenge that we are going through at the moment. It's a disruption. It's still very much in line with our initial philosophy, but the way to go there is has of course changed.
I think what is also still there is our explorative, experimental mindset. It's, even though we are a practice that is 30 years old almost, I think we're still often perceived as a very young, dynamic, energetic company. And it's also something I'm actually very proud of, that this is still here, even though we're quite old.
Yeah, and we're really nerds in a way. Somebody comes to us with the question for an office building in a new town outside of Lille on a plot of land where there used to be a petrol station, and most signature architects would send them away. We think about it and we think, wow, this is the only building that you can actually see of this new town because it's so well planned. And then we say yes, and we try to make it happen. And we even try to make it happen competing with local architects for the same price. So we are just really interested in innovation and these new things. So yeah, that is very strong as a motive, and that also prevents us from becoming this very commercial practice. Actually, all the organization we do, Inge and I, we are trying to make the radical designs possible. We want them to be radical, but we also want to help the practice
Have
to
a real
actually,
business, yeah.
yeah, to build it. Huh? Well,
Yeah.
that's I think that's our main mission, is to help them all to realize their dreams.
Yeah.
We have a few questions here that overlap about actively searching for clients, private or public, who you want to work with, make an impact on, and or change social issues, make an impact on the climate. How do you go about doing this gracefully, with consideration, kind of as a representation of what you're like as a practice, and yet you still have this impatience, like I love the way you describe this. Impatient architects are a good talent pipeline into BD. So I'm curious how do you bring that impatience to pursuing new markets, new target clients, and still going about that from consistent with what you want, the kind of firm you want to build?
Well, I would say that also the BD staff and these impatient architects, they also work here for a reason, because they love our work, they love the thinking and philosophy. And so for them, they are looking for the right partners. And it can be as simple as going to a website and having a look whether that institute, that potential client is actually into our kind of architecture. If the website is riddled with boxes, then it's probably not for us. Or if they talk about the same kind of values, and maybe they don't have the kind of architectural quality that we would offer them, then we could also go there and say, listen, you talk about social, green, diverse, but the architecture looks like this. Should we not collaborate and bring your philosophy, and make buildings out of them that are much closer to it? So yeah, it's actually.
Yeah, indeed, I would say it's a convincing message. That's for starters, and then it would be good if you can prove that with your own built work or what you have done before. So to show to those clients that you're trying to bring in, I think this is good for you, and look, I can do this.
Yeah.
There's another question that you did answer in your book a bit about, and some people are asking about this too, about free work, how you deal with, to what degree you are offering services. It would be also interesting if you could speak a little bit to when you set up the engagement with a client that you're developing a relationship with. At what point do you actually take the relationship building to another level where you're structuring a proposal, so that you don't get caught in a situation where you're continuously providing free value?
Yeah, free work is just totally absurd. This is one of the specialties of architects that, strangely enough, the architectural thinking is just handed over as a present. I think it's absolutely weird in this line of business. We actually want to be paid for it. And for my book, I interviewed all these young architecture practices in Britain, and they all said we never work for free. And then they all were a moment silent, and then they said, well, but. So it is also something, the Helsinki Guggenheim 1,750 architecture teams actually worked for free. It wasn't even built. It is something we are so enthusiastic about architecture that we just give it away for free, and we really shouldn't do this. We should basically not do it, but there is always somebody who does, who believes that this is the right project, and so on. So we have this rule, and we also had it when we were in trouble and we were younger, and that is based on simple sales psychology, that they always have to pay us a little bit at least, even if we think it's a great potential client and they want to test the waters with us. We are a risk for them, and it's such a great location. they need to pay us a little bit, otherwise we know that they are not going to value the work as much, because it's basically worthless because it was given just like that. So that's a very important rule. We also have a rule for a minimum amount of money for a competition, and it needs to be really excellent to go over it. We also did not enter the Guggenheim Helsinki competition because we felt like this was really not serious in that sense, that that everybody could just, you know, you didn't have to apply. It was just so unrealistic, this entire project.
And I think that the question, when you move from networking to an engagement letter or whatever, I would say the moment you start talking about a concrete location, a concrete program, for me, that would be the moment, say, okay, now you're becoming concrete, and I also want to talk about what this means for me. And if you can't pay me now, then at least I want to agree that I'll do this sketch for free. If you use it, you will pay me afterwards. And that's all I do. That at least you set some milestones. Okay, this is all I can give you, and then I want this in return. So the moment you start talking about a project, I would say put something on paper. Yeah. And also, if you get nothing, if you don't get anything paid, I would still put that on paper.
Yeah, and remind them that they got a present, and that perhaps it needs, yeah, there is something else coming back. So you need to talk to them. But the rule of thumb is the moment that you make a design, you need to be paid for it in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this has been an amazing conversation. I wish we could talk for another hour about this without creeping too much into your late night routine. So I just want to thank you both, and I'll ask the last question that we like to ask here, because we do dive into a lot of business, but we at Monograph, we fundamentally believe that it's also important to be human. It's kind of like one of our core values. And so our last question is always kind of brings it back to just being human. And that question is, what's the nicest thing anyone's ever done for you? We get all sorts of answers here, from personal to just, not as personal. So it's up to you, but you could start off with Jan.
Sure. Well, actually, I have to keep it personal, because the nicest thing that anyone ever has done to me certainly didn't happen at work, even though I have wonderful colleagues. But I can do this job only, and I travel a lot, and it's a hectic job, of course, and I love it. I can do this only because my husband supports me with the 3 kids that we have, and without him, I really couldn't do it. And I'm always totally surprised that this is working. I'm very grateful for it.
Awesome. Inge?
I had to think about this, but then I recalled me being on vacation a couple of years ago, receiving a phone call from the neighbor who was taking care of my plants. And then he said, your living room has flooded. What shall we do? Shall we clean up the space and call the fire brigade to pump it all out? And then later we heard that it was not just this neighbor, but actually 3 or 4 of our neighbors had jointly come together in our living room to clean up everything and fix the hole. And I think, it would have been an awful return home after a nice break. So that was a really nice thing of my neighbors to do for us. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you have to experience nice things, and then you can also return them. In my neighborhood, we all together have we have given homes to Ukrainian refugees. And I think in these times, this is super important that you create exactly that moment, hopefully for these people, that if they would come here to you to answer this question, that they can say that, somebody actually took them in.
I mean, that's incredibly powerful. All those stories, just incredible. I mean, that's amazing. If someone wants to get in touch with you, just like with any kind of follow-up questions that you might be interested in answering, how might they be able to do so?
I answer any questions on LinkedIn, so you can become my friend and on LinkedIn, and then I answer the question. I cannot guarantee it's going to be tomorrow, but usually I have a response time of a few days.
Yeah, same for me. I'm also available on LinkedIn. I respond to everybody, but I also get a lot of acquisition questions, mainly from visualizers, and there I provide with no answer. So that's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah, don't sell us renders. We have a render studio.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's I admire all your talents, but we have people in-house that do all our visualizations. But other than that, I answer your questions.
Thank you both, Inga, Jan, Chris. Thank you so much for joining me. Really, really amazing conversation. And I hope we can continue it. Yeah, hope we can continue it in person someday. It would be great for us to travel over and check out the offices there and the orange room, which we didn't get to see.
More than welcome.
We're also opening in Manhattan quite soon, so I hope you can meet us there. And well, thank you so much for having us. It was a great pleasure.
Amazing. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. Cheers. See you next time.